there you are. Come and sit by the fire. There is a small story waiting for you tonight. You don't need to listen closely. The forest never asks for effort. If your thoughts wander, the forest will hold the words for you, carrying them softly until they fade into something more comfortable. Tonight's story is about something small that was lost, and a quiet kindness that chose to return it. There are evenings in Whispergrove when I walk without purpose, not toward a destination, not away from anything. I simply follow the paths as they unfold beneath my feet, letting the forest decide how far I am meant to go. On one such evening, the light was already beginning to soften when I stepped beneath the trees. The magical forest of Whispergrove was calm that night. Not silent, it never is, but settled. Leaves rested where they had fallen. The air moved slowly, as though it had nowhere else to be. Somewhere in the distance, water found its way over stone, patient and unhurried. I walked with my staff in hand, its worn wood familiar beneath my palm. Each step pressed gently into the earth, and the earth, as always, pressed back. Step, pause, breath. The rhythm had been with me for so long that I scarcely noticed it anymore. It was only after some time that the rhythm changed, not in sound, not in movement, but in feeling. There are moments in Whispergrove when the forest seems to shift its attention. Nothing visible changes, and yet you know you are no longer alone in your thoughts. I continued walking, allowing the feeling to exist without naming it. Naming things too quickly often causes them to retreat. The path curved gently to the left, passing between two old trees whose branches leaned toward one another like old friends sharing a secret. I paused there, resting my hand against the bark, feeling the slow life beneath it. That was when I noticed what was missing. One of my rings was no longer on my hand. It was a simple thing, a plain band of metal smoothed by years of quiet wear. It held no magic of its own, no inscription, no story anyone else would recognize. And yet it had been with me for a long time. I searched my palm, then my other hand, as though it might have wandered there on its own. It had not. I turned slowly, more curious than concerned. The magical forest of Whispergrove does not take without reason. And there, standing just beyond the edge of the path, I saw it. A Gatherkin. It stood partly in shadow, its tall, broad form blending easily with the trees around it. The Gatherkin did not move when I turned. It did not flinch or step away. In its large, careful hands it held my ring, not clenched, not hidden. It held the ring as one might hold something fragile and unfamiliar, turning it slowly, studying its shape, its weight, its quiet presence. The Gatherkin's movements were deliberate. Each motion followed the last as though guided by thought rather than instinct. Moss clung to its shoulders and arms, softening the lines of its strength. Small pouches hung at its side, bulging slightly with gathered things, pieces of wood, smooth stones, fragments of the forest others had passed by without a second glance. We looked at one another for a long moment. The forest remained still. I did not speak. Words are not always the right beginning. Instead, I slowly extended my hand. The Gatherkin hesitated. I could see the pause ripple through it. Not fear, but uncertainty. The kind that comes when one holds something that clearly matters, yet does not belong. The ring caught a sliver of fading light as the Gatherkin turned it once more. Then, with great care, it stepped forward. The ground shifted softly beneath its weight. It placed a ring into my open palm. Our hands did not touch. There was no rush to retreat, no sudden movement, just the quiet understanding that some things know where they are meant to be. I closed my fingers around the ring and inclined my head slightly in thanks. The Gatherkin watched, as though committing the moment to memory. Then it stepped back, returning to the shelter of the trees. I resumed my walk. The ring rested once more against my skin, warm from my hand, yet something had changed. As I moved along the path, I became aware of movement behind me. Slow, measured. I did not turn. In the magical forest of Whispergrove, some presences reveal themselves best when you allow them space. The Gatherkin followed at a distance, not close enough to intrude, not far enough to disappear. Each time I slowed, it slowed. Each time I paused, it paused as well. There was no sense of being watched, only accompanied. As the path carried us deeper into the forest, I noticed the Gatherkin's habits. It often stopped along the way, bending slowly to examine the ground. It gathered small things: a fallen branch shaped just right, a stone worn smooth by years of water, a fragment of wood long abandoned by time. But it never seemed eager. There was no urgency in its movements, no sign of satisfaction when something was found. It gathered and gathered and gathered, yet nothing about it felt like possession. There was purpose there. Quiet, patient purpose. When at last the path curved toward my home, I stopped. The Gatherkin stopped too. We stood there for a moment, the space between us calm and untroubled. Then I continued on alone. That night, as I sat beside the fire, the image of the Gatherkin returned to me. Not its size, not its strength, but its patience. The way it had held the ring, the way it had followed without asking, the way it gathered without claiming. The magical forest of Whispergrove seemed to settle around the thought, as though it approved of my noticing. I slept easily. The following day I found myself walking the same path again, not because I had planned to, but because the forest guided my steps there all the same. The light filtered softly through the canopy. The air carried the scent of moss and earth. And there, near the place where we had met before, stood the Gatherkin. This time, it did not turn away. Instead, it straightened slowly and faced me fully. For the first time, it made a gesture, not a command, not a request, just a simple motion of the hand directed away from the path. "Follow me." I did not hesitate. Some invitations do not need words. The Gatherkin did not wait to see if I would follow. It turned slowly, its long steps measured and calm, and began moving away from the familiar path into a quieter part of the magical forest of Whispergrove. I followed. The forest shifted subtly around us as we walked. The ground grew softer beneath my boots. The trees leaned closer together, their branches forming a gentle canopy that dimmed the light into something more intimate. The Gatherkin walked with purpose now, though still without haste. Every so often it stopped, not to gather, but to ensure I was still there. I was. We came at last to a small clearing, tucked carefully between low hills and thick roots, hidden in a way that felt intentional. There, resting quietly against the earth, stood a structure, a house. It was not grand, it was not polished, but it was deliberate. Wood had been fitted together with care, stones placed where they could bear weight, fragments of gathered things woven into the walls to block the wind and steady the frame. Half of it stood firm and certain, The other half waited. I did not need to be told. The Gatherkin was not collecting things, it had been building. The Gatherkin moved slowly around the structure, its large hands brushing the walls, testing what already stood. Then it stopped and gestured toward a place near the centre. Something was missing. Not a piece, but an understanding. A final support needed to be balanced, not forced. A stone needed to rest, not be pressed. Something had to be held steady while something else found its place. The Gatherkin was strong, stronger than most. It could lift what others could not. It could endure without complaint. But strength alone does not always know when to stop. The Gatherkin demonstrated. It pressed against the structure, careful not to break it, but firm enough to show its effort. The house shifted slightly, not enough to fall, but enough to remain unfinished. Again and again, the Gatherkin adjusted, always patient, always persistent, and always just short of completion. I watched quietly. Some lessons reveal themselves only when you let them finish speaking. Then, gently, the Gatherkin led me away from the house to a nearby shelter made of woven branches and leaves. There, curled close together, sat two smaller Gatherkin. They were still, watching us with wide, calm eyes. They did not approach. They did not retreat. They waited. In that moment, everything became clear. This house was not for one. It was for safety, for shelter, for something that would last longer than a single season. I felt the quiet weight of that understanding settle into me. I set my staff down beside the structure. Slowly, I began to work, not with force, but with attention. I showed the Gatherkin how a stone could be turned so that its weight rested where it wished to be, how smaller pieces, placed correctly, could carry more than larger ones set carelessly, how patience, when given direction, becomes something steady. The Gatherkin watched closely. It did not rush to imitate, it observed. Then it tried again, more gently this time. The structure shifted, and then held. We worked together for a long while. There was no sense of time passing. The magical forest of Whispergrove does not measure hours when something important is being learned. Sometimes we stood in silence, studying the angles of wood and stone. Sometimes the Gatherkin paused, adjusting a piece just slightly, as though listening to the house itself. And slowly, almost without noticing, the house found its balance. The final support settled into place. The structure stood. The Gatherkin placed its hand against the wall and remained there for a long moment. Not testing, listening. Then it stepped back and looked at the house as a whole. Simple, strong, ready. The smaller Gatherkin approached then, moving cautiously as though unsure whether the moment was real. They touched the wall, then each other. The house held. The Gatherkin turned to me. For a moment it did nothing, then it stepped forward and embraced me. Carefully, almost uncertainly. There was no weight in it, only gratitude. When it stepped back, it reached into one of its pouches and drew out something it had kept hidden. A stone. Smooth, warm. It glowed faintly, not brightly enough to demand attention, but steadily enough to be noticed. It was beautiful, not because it was rare, but because it was calm. The Gatherkin held it out to me. It could not be used for building. It did not belong in the house. So it was given freely. I accepted the stone not as a treasure, but as a memory, a reminder. I placed it carefully into my pocket, where it rested warm against my side. The Gatherkin watched, then turned back to its family. The house welcomed them quietly. I took up my staff and began the walk home. The path felt familiar again. The ring rested once more on my finger. The stone rested in my pocket. And as the magical forest of Whispergrove closed gently around me, a thought followed, soft and unspoken. Some gather to own, others gather to protect. And sometimes the most valuable thing of all is what someone else does not need. The story rests here for tonight. Its words no longer need your attention, and its footsteps have faded back into the forest. The fire remains, glowing softly beside you, steady and patient in the quiet. Beyond its light, the trees stand at ease, holding the night without sound or hurry. You don't need to stay awake for anything more. Nothing is expected of you now. If sleep has not already found you, you may allow yourself to drift gently toward it, trusting that whatever dreams come will be calm and kind and untroubled. Stay as long as you wish. Rest as deeply as you can. Good night, my friend.